Hey everybody, welcome back. My name is Patrick Tan, General Counsel for ChainArgos, the blockchain intelligence firm that outed Binance's $1.4 billion BUSD under collateralization, just in case you forgot. With me, as usual, every week is Jonathan Reiter, our CEO and Chief Data Scientist. I do apologize for the background noise. It's a typical Friday at the office. Everybody's having a little bit of fun. So, without further ado, what are we talking about this week? You guys seem to really enjoy that bit about A16Z from the last episode, and we enjoyed doing that as well because, it just kind of makes sense that, you wouldn't name your funds, you'd name your fund some kind of obscure, thing that people may not necessarily...
I mean, that's a common thing.
Yeah,
I
it's a common
suspect
thing.
that's why probably people didn't bother to look these up at TPG Asia V 5, right? Names like that are common for SPVs.
Yeah. So this week, what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about Ledger's new technology, their secure screen. Spoiler alert, it's not like an iPhone's update, so we'll get to that in a minute.
Maybe it is actually, but all right.
Maybe, yeah, increasingly so. I do agree with that. Increasingly so. I mean, what exactly are we paying for? Next, we'll talk about ESMA and MiCA. For those of you not familiar, this is MiCA is the European Union's legislation concerning crypto assets. That's the term that they use. And, and some of the industry responses and industry feedback to what is essentially going to become law at the end of the year. And then finally, we talk about UAE's new payment token regulations and what that means. So we'll get to that in a minute. So let's just talk about Ledger's secure smart screen. Is that correct? Is it a secure smart screen? Is it just a secure screen?
Secure screen, I think, although it's probably a smart wallet, something like that.
Oh, so, okay, for those of you who don't know, Ledger manufactures fancy thumb drives, which you can store your the private keys to your crypto wallet in. And
it has built in some kind of a display and keyboard
with
thing.
like a little tool of
the exact
buttons and
details
stuff like
depend
that,
on which
yeah.
model you buy,
Yeah.
so that you can enter passwords and things like that without it ever going to your computer that's internet connected. So we spoke about Ledger a few months ago when there was a attack, software supply chain hack regarding Ledger firmware, and the issue was that someone had managed to get malicious code into part of the Ledger ecosystem, and so people who ran certain updates ended up having tokens stolen because while a cold wallet may be not connected to the internet much of the time, there needs to be some way to get those bits down the wire to be able to use them for something. And if you can exploit the software that facilitates those transfers, you may be able to steal some money. The idea that you can make those transfers work only one way, that's related to what we're talking about today. In your mind, the example you want to have in your head of something that only works one way is a situation where you're given a signing request and you print it out, right? And you type it or something like that into a laptop that does not have internet access at all, and then you print it out from that laptop. You can also use writable CD-ROMs, stuff like that, writable CDs, stuff like that, so that there can be only one way of transfer, because of course you plug a thumb drive in, you're not really completely sure that no data was written or read that you didn't know about. Even if you have really good control over the computer, it becomes harder and harder to have 100% confidence depending on who your adversary is. There are reports of attacks, audio attacks to read people's hard drives and identify things based on noises and the speed of head movements and whatnot.
So basically $200 for a $5 thumb drive.
Well, it's yeah. So what they've got is a system that has a variety of security features, and we're not criticizing all that. We've spoken before about how because the firmware can be upgraded, you can't really have 100% confidence what's going on here. You can find our old podcast. We can put a link in the chat, in the comments, whatever, regarding the old podcast. Here they've got a new model. So the processor, or part of the processing element, is similar to the thing you see on debit cards, right? It's a similar concept there, where you have a little tiny computer that's able to reliably sign requests, indicate ownership of something, and it's not possible to extract the private keys from that enclave, the secure enclave, secure computing, so that you can reliably prove who you are and nobody will be able to forge the credentials. In a very basic sense, the idea is if you try to open the container and extract the data, it self-destructs, something like that. This is not a podcast about, about spy technology or about how these things work. It's called often a secure enclave, secure computing. It's separate from the cloud computing concept of the Intel SGX secure guard extensions. They're vaguely similar concepts, but it's not the same thing. So what they've done here is they've managed to extend the secure certification type things from just one or two of the devices to include the screen itself. So they have bigger, fancier screens, like every other computer device in the world. The screens get fancier over time, and that increases your security. Okay, so as a result, you sort of take a closer look. You have a fancier screen, you got fancier software, there's more running on this device. So the screen doesn't really seem like one of the attack vectors here. I mean, in theory, somebody could put malware on your home smart television and steal something that way, but that's not a realistic attack for a thumb drive holding crypto keys that already has upgradable firmware and has had supply chain problems with its software ecosystem before. So that's not ideal. And at the same time, they run their own proprietary, secure, embedded, whatever operating system. They don't even use one of the standard ones that's out there for all of the, payment point of sale type devices that exist in the world that are pretty secure. Theirs is, I believe, called Bolos. There are several major. There's a Java thing that runs embedded, and there's a thing called Multos. These are large projects, well secured and supported by a large number of financial services and payment provider, like old school payment provider software device producers. So I would be more concerned that the software they're running is in fact insecure because it's a closed source thing written by a small crypto team, and they've had supply chain problems before, and their firmware can be upgraded in ways that, like, your debit card can't have its firmware upgraded. Yeah, that's not how that works. Lots of these simple devices are designed that way for a reason. Even in the 90s, the Clipper chip, an old tamper-resistant encryption product that's totally gone right now, but at least for a while, people assumed that you couldn't actually get the keys. There are lots of problems with the Clipper chip, right? But we've spent decades trying to build very, very simple devices that are, in fact, tamper-resistant. It's not perfect. It's very good, and it's almost certainly better than a closed-source operating system developed by a small collection of people. Is it possible that Bolos is actually just one of the other things that's known out there and used in the space that they're copying and trying to keep up to date on their own? Sure. You can go look at YouTube videos from Greg Crow-Hartman talking about how maintaining your own fork of a large complex software system, in that case Linux, is a terrible idea from a security perspective. So once again, I think the bottom line here is Ledger is claiming a whole bunch of interesting security properties, but most of what they're doing when you look seems to violate almost all the best practices that you would follow if you were really doing this correctly. So, maybe they're doing a brilliant job, but this seems like a feature that's been put on there to have a gold star that... All right.
$200 for a $5 thumb drive?
Well, look, the fact that you're adding features and fancier screens to consumer electronics, that's what happens with consumer electronics. I don't blame anybody for that.
So $200 for a $5 thumb drive is what you're saying.
I don't need a 4K television because my eyes aren't that good, but I don't fault people for
I think the next thing that should be introduced should be a special helmet with the glasses that you can use with the screen, so that the helmet prevents anybody from reading your brainwaves when you're putting in your private keys.
My younger brother had a Nintendo controller in the 80s called the Power Glove. It didn't sell very well, but some people will know this. And it was a glove, and it had, which arm am I? It had, buttons along here, and you could, maybe you could have a Ledger Power Glove. He broke it eventually. He was very unhappy. My mother did not buy him a new one. My parents were not pleased with his...
So, okay, moving on from the sublime to the ridiculous. Let's go with the ESMA and MiCA industry feedback. So a little bit of backstory. If you're not familiar with the civil law system, essentially in Europe, how it works is that everybody sits down at a table. We all think about all the possibilities, and then we draft this civil code. It's like a rule. It's like a book of laws. This is how all of these things will be regulated. And the idea is to be as comprehensive as possible so that people who are operating in space know what is on and off bounds. It's different from a common law system, which generally tends to be you can do everything you like. We don't like it. We litigate against you. We we deal with you by enforcement, and then you end up in prison.
Well, I will say, in practice in the EU, a lot of the market regulation stuff is a little bit more common
Yeah.
law because financial market regulation is evolving. all the time.
There are aspects of both systems which overlap with each other. So, like, very commonly, regulatory agencies in common law systems will promulgate regulatory codes, guidelines, specific regulations that people have to comply with, which is more similar to a civil law system. And civil law systems as well also rely on precedents from past decisions of judges and stuff like that, although they're not necessarily binding. So that there are overlaps of both systems. They're not mutually exclusive. They are based off of the same core tenet, which is common sense. So with ESMA and MiCA, what the idea here is that they want to have a comprehensive legislation regulation to provide some sort of certainty for actors who are operating in the crypto space, which is what you see a lot of crypto bros in the U.S. bay a lot for. We need more certainty, we need more regulations, you need to tell us what to do and stuff like that. Well,
And of course, the way you get certainty in the United States is you try something and get sued.
Yeah.
The way you get certainty in Europe actually is to ask for it, but it takes longer, and people complain it takes too long.
Yeah, so you want certainty, move to EU. What can I say?
And wait 10 years.
And wait 10 years. So one of those pieces of feedback, interestingly enough, came from Paradigm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is specifically about the applications of the EU market abuse rules. So this is one of the areas that is more common and less civil as far as EU enforcement is concerned. So they have regulations against market abuse. The definitions are, more specific than the term abuse, but they are a little bit soft because it's not entirely clear how this works, and are certain types of fat finger trades, market abuse, intentional, front running, spoofing. How does this stuff work? It's not terribly clear in the United States and the United Kingdom, and it remains not the clearest thing in the European Union as well. Although it's slowly getting better, but this stuff is taking a long time everywhere because it's hard. I know people who I used to work with involved in various directions of those types of activities, and sometimes you read the transcripts and it makes you very angry because that guy sat behind you and you can't believe he was doing that. And in other cases, it's really unclear, and you feel like, I don't know what I would have.
Yeah.
Like that seems like it was right, maybe, and maybe they got in trouble, didn't get in trouble. In some cases, you think, well, that person's a proper sleazebag, but I agree that was probably legal, and in fact, they got off or didn't get off or whatever. It's fascinating. People who worked in finance from more than 10, 15 years ago back for a while all have such stories because the rules have changed.
Yeah.
The rules have changed. Conduct that was considered acceptable in the 90s, some of which was clearly objectionable and some of which was fine,
if you go
is now
back
considered
far enough,
okay.
some of the conduct in the 20s.
Well, okay, no, but I mean stuff that, in fact, people thought was okay, governments decided were not okay, and then those people were eventually acquitted, and the court said, yeah, no, this was always fine, that was a government mistake.
Yeah.
Right? You've seen that. I know people involved in some of that kind of thing. Which is, it's difficult, because you think, well, that's a bit sleazy, but I thought that was legal. The court says it's not legal, what am I supposed to do? And then eventually, the appeals court says, yeah, that was legal, don't worry about it. And you, okay, well, it sucks for the person that went through this, whatever. Now, in this case, specifically, there's a block of feedback from Paradigm, a big crypto VC, whatever investor, early Coinbase investor. One of the Coinbase co-founders is Paradigm's head person. And their complaint is about how market abuse generically, so with respect to front running and those types of activities, would be applied to MEV and other base layer activities. It's a request for more clarity in that sense. I find this sort of amusing in that arguing that we know exactly how to define front running in any market is ridiculous. They give some sort of partial quotes from some previous market abuse type statements that have been issued, but nobody who operates in markets for any period of time thinks the lines on these things are clearly drawn. Even for government bond or listed equity trading, it's not exactly clear what the rules are. And then part of their argument is it's a permissionless system and people participate with complicated algorithms, so you can't hold anybody responsible. The short response to that, I think, is the government can try to hold anybody it can identify responsible for anything it thinks they've done wrong. So you may argue that it's, we don't have to identify these people because it's permissionless, but if the government decides, look, certain activities definitely front running, right? So you're going to be able to go after people for that, and you figure out who they are, you go after them. That argument makes zero sense.
The easy way to understand this is that if 5 people rob a bank, we only able to identify 2 of them. Let's just give up and not prosecute anybody because we can't catch all 5.
In some cases, that does sound like the argument that they're making. There are also slightly more nuanced arguments that if the system is organized around the concept of effectively front running, restructuring the order of transactions to maximize profit, then it can't be something that's not right. And of course, you can build a factory that complies with all the health and safety regulations but produces heroin, and it's not legal. These two things are separate concepts.
That's an interesting idea, but let's wind back a little bit so that people understand, because not everybody understands what this idea of MEV and also the idea of ordering transactions. So a lot of people think that transactions just occur like naturally, like how the grass grows on a blockchain. So because the miners can choose which transactions get to go first, the concern, of course, is that if you know that that's like an order on a DEX or something like that for a price or something, you can front run.
I would make this even simpler. So there's a finite amount of transaction bandwidth on public blockchains and some procedure for deciding who generates the next block. So people bid for bid for space, and they bid for order within that finite space. So the person running the market isn't just taking in orders, executing them, and returning them in the order they got. They're taking them in and accepting bids for how quickly they're going to get executed. And they can decide to insert their own trades if they want or not, right? So people are paying me to trade first, last, and I can say, oh, you go first because you paid me more money, but I'm going to trade ahead of you and sell back to you afterwards. Stuff like that is completely legal here, or at least it's completely normal here. The question is whether or not it's legal.
I think the legal is a bit, we don't.
Yeah, it's completely normal.
And
it's accepted. Although, again, lots of illegal activities are accepted in some subgroups of society. So, yeah.
And then some of the arguments I saw being made, I struggle with, because when you see them describe how it operates, from a blockchain bro perspective, it's exactly the sort of violation that you see in regular financial markets. So the idea that
sorry, I think they would argue the difference is if your broker front runs you, your broker's a trusted party, and they're saying the block builder, that type of one of the people involved in this ecosystem, isn't trusted by anybody. It's a free-for-all. I mean, I think the response would be, if it's really considered a free-for-all, then one guy paying the exchange to insert their trades above another would be permitted, but the rules don't allow that.
A battle royale is also a free-for-all, but those are illegal. So,
I mean, if I paid Interactive Brokers to execute my trades ahead of everybody else's, we would all get in trouble.
Yes.
Right? Yes. And you can argue that that's against a specific written rule for equities or whatever. So you keep changing asset classes, products, foreign exchange. You find something where there's no written rule like that. You can't just get exempted because you think your stuff works differently. And again, there is not... I personally think there's not a sufficient level of clarity even around U.S. government bond trading in the United States in these areas. So complaining that the rules shouldn't be enforced against you till it's cleared up, I'm sorry. I mean, I know people that have ended up in court with stuff that continues to be unclear.
What is that?
This is the way it works.
Like, you can't necessarily define what pornography is, but when everybody...
I know it when I see it.
I know it when I see it.
Potter Stewart.
Yeah.
Which that is used as an example of a decision that's not actually good. So it was an old Supreme Court thing in the United States saying, we can't define pornography, but I know it when I see it. That's not good. But the point was that's better than just saying, All right, these things are difficult. You end up with lots of precedents. This is challenging, and this is a case where what the crypto people are asking for, what Paradigm specifically is asking for, is a degree of specificity that absolutely does not exist even for the most highly regulated, organized markets in the world, and it's totally unreasonable.
I don't think
and asking for the regulation enforcement to be stayed pending that clarity is asking for there to never be any enforcement, and no one's going to accept that, and the regulators know that because they know. You speak to them, they will tell you, we're aware this is confusing. We don't really know what to do either. We're trying.
Yeah, no, and I think that it is fair in this case, at least, to respond that I don't know how to define specific market manipulation, but I'll know it when I see it. When I see it, and I'll be able to tell you that that's what that is. And I mean,
in a sandwich attack, I knew it when I saw it. Right?
Yeah. Those are delicious. Next, finally, the UAE payment token regulation. So just a bit of an update here, if you haven't been following. Essentially what the UAE, which is where Dubai is in, so it stands for the United Arab Emirates, and what they've decided is that you can't use crypto tokens to pay for stuff. So you can't use...
Well, that's not quite true. So you have to have license. So they're introducing something like a licensing regime, and they're doing the standard offshore financial center thing, and we do not mean that in a derisory sense
Yeah,
at
yeah,
all,
yeah.
of saying we have a relatively tight regulatory regime for local
Yeah.
payments,
Yeah.
banking, markets type activities. And then if you want to run things that operate solely offshore out of here, that's great.
Yeah.
Have a good time. And then you follow extremely basic anti-fraud and anti-money laundering rules that are pretty mild. This is the way offshore financial systems, offshore financial centers operate. This is almost exactly the position that Deltec has itself in the Bahamas, where they are a foreign-facing financial institution, and the rules are basically don't go bankrupt, don't touch any locals, right? So
Don't
you're
touch
not
any
part of the
locals is
local
always
financial
a good-
system. Yeah, you're not part of the local financial system. You can't give local residents local currency bank accounts. There's no ATMs, that kind of stuff. You're an offshore financial system. It's the same reason when people go visit offshore financial centers. Look, you go to Switzerland and you walk around, you see cash machines from like 5 different banks. In fact, depending on what part of Switzerland you're in, you might see cash machines at this point from only Raiffeisen, and whether it says UBS or Credit Suisse depends on if they've finished the renovations. But that might be it. Right. So you'll see some cantonal banks. There's not, whereas Switzerland's got banks all over the place. You walk around the UK, right? You don't see foreign bank cash machines very much, even though every bank in the world has an office in London. You walk around Singapore, there's cash machines from like 8 or 9 banks that are authorized in total, and some of those, like Bangkok Bank has like 2 cash machines or something, right? It's not a local facing thing. So what the UAE is saying is we would love to be a great place for people to do crypto businesses that don't have anything to do with the United Arab Emirates local market, please. And that is the standard thing offshore financial centers do. Right?
Yeah.
You walk around Hong Kong, you can't open Russian bank accounts or Argentine bank accounts, even though they've all got branches there because of trade with China and the rest of it.
Which is perfectly reasonable.
Yeah, I mean, that's what offshore financial systems are. That's how they work. And it was interesting to see people concerned this regulation might prevent the use. Yes, the regulation will prevent the use of what you're trying to do.
And I mean, if you've never spent any extended period of time in the UAE, the local population, the local market's not big anyway. So
Well, this is why offshore financial centers are generally tiny places, because Citibank, whatever, a large global financial institution, is perfectly happy to write off the 300,000 local residents. They can't. You think the Bahamas local market is important to every global bank that has a trust offshore wealth management operation there? It's not a lot of people, and the ones that have a lot of money can have offshore bank accounts in a different offshore jurisdiction anyway. Right?
Yeah.
Who lives in an offshore financial center? Foreigners that are there to work the offshore financial center, right? That's true in, New York for the United States has the largest number of foreigners working like that. London's got a lot of this. Tokyo's got a lot of this. Hong Kong, Singapore, the UAE, other Uruguay, Montevideo. These places are offshore financial centers. Miami to some extent now. Then there's the local population that has a lot of money. Well, those people can have bank accounts anywhere in the world, anywhere. And then there's the local population that doesn't have a lot of money. And as long as that slice of the population isn't tens of millions of people, every financial institution is perfectly happy to say, all right, we'll run an offshore operation here, and we're sorry we can't bank these 175,000 people, but them's the deal.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Actually, Singapore, I don't think has such restrictions on local. Oh, the local banking
To some extent.
rules here are a little bit different.
Yeah.
There are restrictions that
There
they're
are
different
restrictions.
restrictions. It's not.
They might put limits on how many
Yeah.
ATMs you have, how many
Yeah.
branches you have.
This is enforced
you
differently,
know,
but
and then like
The U.S. doesn't have any such restrictions because the U.S. doesn't restrict or anything. But that's not an offshore financial center for obvious reasons. The stuff in the Caribbean, Switzerland, that's the way that works. Switzerland doesn't have so much local resident restriction. But anyway, running a bank in Switzerland that services locals is expensive. That's why there aren't that many of them. So this is not surprising, and I think this will probably make people think the UAE is a less friendly place to do some crypto business, because their intention was to do a lot of local crypto business because it's a small place. Again, these local financial centers, for the reason I just described of having a small enough local population that financial institutions are willing to just write off as a business perspective, right? That means you're a small, dense area. It's a great place. Singapore, Hong Kong, Dubai are great places to do local crypto payments experiments because there's lots of shops around and you can meet all the people and you can build the network. Yeah, no. Need license, need a banking license, need do full regulatory enema, such as it is. And
animal,
it's an intrusive regulatory apparatus.
like a colonoscopy.
Well, that's what happens, I guess, once a year to make sure that your stablecoin pipes are flowing smoothly.
There you go.
There's no assets backed up in the collateral chain.
Assets, I like that. And on that note, thank you for tuning in. Thanks for the comments, likes, and subscribes. Don't forget to check out John's very special podcast hosted by Radu Magdin. Am I saying that right?
My accent's not very good either. So.
Okay. Hosted by Radu Magdin and featuring Dr. Victor Rivera.
Magdin, I think.
Maybe. Okay. Anyway, check it out on the channel.
Sorry, Radu.
Yeah, it's a 5-episode special. This week's first episode has already been released, so don't forget to check that out. And that concerns some of the stuff that we're doing in Bucharest. Otherwise, thanks for all the comments, likes, and subscribes, and the feedback. We really enjoy it. Every week, we try to give you fresh material. We try to look for new things that are happening in the space that we can comment on. If you have any ideas or any comments or any questions, please don't forget to hit us up in the comment section below. Otherwise, we'll see you next week. Thank you, and have a great weekend.
Oh, yeah, we definitely take topic suggestions.
Yeah, we do that all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, do we take topic suggestions?
We do.
Well, that's where your suggestion. Okay, fair enough.
Bye.